Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. President Donald Trump says he wants to close the Department of Education, and some members of Congress are on board with the idea. North Carolina receives billions of federal dollars for public schools, not to mention aid and loans for college students. What happens to that money and other federal education programs if the department goes away? WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst is here to explain. Emily, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
From a high level, can you explain what the Department of Education does for states and local schools, particularly North Carolina?
So the Department of Education does a couple of really big things. So the biggest thing they do is actually related to higher education. So that's managing a $1 trillion+ student loan program, billions of dollars in Pell Grants and other financial aid every year. At the K-12 level, the biggest programs they have are Title I, that's for schools with high proportions of lower income students. And they also do the Individuals with Disability and Education Act. They implement that, and essentially that's services for students who have disabilities to help them have what they need to succeed. So those are really the biggest things that the department does, but also does a lot of other investigative type things. If you make a complaint that a certain law, civil rights law, isn't being followed, whether or Title IX isn't being followed, there are a number of things that you can file a complaint about. So that's basically what they do.
Now, President Trump has been signaling for years now that he wants to do away with the Department of Education, and he's really been talking about it in recent weeks. What does he want to do, and do we know what that might look like?
So, he's basically said he wants to get rid of the department. The big thing that he keeps saying is, that basically it's a source of liberal indoctrination in schools, and he wants to get rid of that. There have been other people who have also wanted to get rid of the education department who haven't necessarily cited those things specifically. But what Trump has said is basically he wants to get rid of that. He's already taken executive orders aimed at trying to get that out of any type of educational facility. But he hasn't necessarily given a very specific plan about what would happen. So we know that a lot of things that the department does are actually carrying out existing laws. So Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act, that is a law passed by Congress before the Department of Education even existed. So basically you can't get rid of that program by just getting rid of the department. There's still a law in the books that says you have to do this. So it really, and that's just one example. So it really comes down to what the plan actually is when we see it, of how some of these programs will be reorganized, or if they will be reorganized at all. We know there have been some calls for opponents of the Federal Department of Education. Project 2025 by the Heritage Foundation wants to gradually get rid of Title I funding for lower income schools. They want to phase that out over 10 years and make states eventually pay for it. That's not something Trump has specifically said he wants to do, but it's just an example of you can dissolve this department in any number of ways. And so that's why the actual blueprint, it would be really informative.
Now, it wasn't too long ago that this department didn't exist, right?
Yeah. So I already named one law that predates the department's existence, but Title I predates the department's existence. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed in the 60s. That was before the department even existed. That law has also been amended over the years to add and subtract things, but a lot of programs were basically established in that law as well. Title I, other title programs that you might be familiar with, all predate the department.
So it's possible for that funding to still move around the system without the department, right?
Right. So the thinking might be that maybe IDEA, the special education law, would move under the Department of Health and Human Services because maybe they're familiar with disabilities. That could be one solution. It really just kind of depends on the proposal.
Can Trump shut the department down himself through executive order?
The consensus here is no. Congress created the Education Department, so Congress would have to take it away.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive deeper into what eliminating the Department of Education could mean for North Carolina. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst about President Donald Trump's plans for the U.S. Department of Education. Emily, how do North Carolinians feel about this idea of abolishing the Department of Education?
So there was some recent polling on this. This took place in the first week of February. Meredith College did a poll, and they asked voters this question in North Carolina, and a majority opposed it. It didn't do well among Democrats, especially didn't do well against more independent voters. Very conservative people supported the idea, but generally it wasn't something that people liked.
Now, what are state and local officials saying about it? People who might have to vote on this either in Congress or might have to deal with the consequences here on the ground level.
So there's actually a congressman from North Carolina who every session of Congress has submitted a bill to get rid of the Department of Education. We know there are politicians who have been pushing for this for many years. It's not really a new idea. It was floated by President Ronald Reagan. Trump, of course, himself has been saying it for years. But during his first term, Congress wouldn't take it up. So we know that there's an appetite among some politicians in North Carolina, but there's also a lot of opposition. So the Wake County School Board, they've talked about this publicly in open session. They're drafting a letter to congressional representatives saying, don't do this. This department has a lot of employees who provide a lot of support. This would be really disruptive. And they're also very worried that dissolving the department could come with getting rid of funding.
Now, as we've discussed, this is just a proposal, but Trump has issued some other education orders. What has he done so far?
Right. So he has issued an order calling for federal agencies to do what they need to do to investigate whether, liberal indoctrination type things are happening. So specifically, he's talking about critical race theory, basically teachings on racial issues that he doesn't like, and gender ideology. So anything that might have to do with gender identity or transgender people, he really wants to get out of any type of educational institution.
And that's kind of gotten in the way of some university funding too, right?
Right. So, universities, we know the UNC system has already been kind of concerned about complying with these laws and making sure that they are, or executive orders rather, and making sure they're in line. So recently they decided they weren't going to require any diversity, equity, or inclusion courses for graduation throughout the system.
Now, Linda McMahon is Trump's nominee for Education Secretary. She had a confirmation hearing last week, and there could be a vote this upcoming week. What does she think about this proposal? Is she going to be leading a department that doesn't exist?
She's in favor of that. She wants to get rid of the department. Essentially, the Education Secretary would kind of oversee the smoothness of the transition. But essentially, she agrees with it. She had some thoughts for senators when they asked her, exactly how it would be dissolved. She said Congress would definitely need to do it. She said that she had some ideas of, special education could move under DHS, the Office of Civil Rights, which investigates civil rights violations by schools, could move under the Department of Justice. She just had some different ideas along those lines. She said she doesn't want to get rid of Title I funding. And most North Carolina schools are Title I schools. That's a big source of funding for the state.
Going to be interesting to watch this play out. Thanks, Emily.
Of course.
That's WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst for her reporting on Trump's education policies. Go to the education section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.